In retrospect, asking people to identify a language from an unofficial writing system that I made up without any context whatsoever was not the brightest idea. Hello everybody, I'm LinguaPhiliax, and today I'm going to be talking about AusWrit, a constructed script I created to help me learn Auslan. Although many of you who have seen my TikToks will probably have some idea of how it works, but I'm still going to make an official video about it, several videos. In fact, if you've only just discovered my channel through my TikTok account, and if any of this stuff interests you at all, don't forget to give this video a like and share it online, as well as subscribe and ring that notification bell. But anyway, for those of you that don't know, Auslan is pretty much the de facto sign language spoken by the deaf community and many others in Australia, or at very least it's the most commonly taught sign language. I do know that there are other sign languages spoken in Australia, but I honestly don't know enough about them yet to make any claims on their status in education, their vitality, their number of speakers, or even their grammar or phonetics. In fact, sign languages in general are very new territory for me, as spoken languages are more my area of expertise, but sign languages are still just as much valid methods of communication as spoken languages are and should be treated with the same respect. And I felt like I would be doing myself a disservice as a linguist if I didn't learn at least something about how sign languages work, so one day I decided to learn a little bit about Auslan and see what its deal was. But after I started learning the language, I found myself struggling to remember anything, since I find it way easier to learn languages if I can write the words and sentences down. And as you can probably imagine, it's pretty difficult to concisely explain how a sign and its relevant components are performed, since even the most basic and common signs have various intricate parts to them that are necessary to pay attention to in order to speak the language properly. So then I decided to make my own sign language writing system, instead of doing what a normal person would do and Google whether somebody had already thought of this exact same concept, which it turns out they have, by the way. It started off mainly as trial and error, but after a while I did begin to notice a couple of patterns between all sorts of signs, and I found myself focusing on the same sorts of things, like the position of the arms, the shape of the hands, the direction of movement, etc. And after a year or so of creating this system, I feel like it's now gotten to a point where I can talk about it with other people in a concise way. Unfortunately, it is way too much information to put into one single video. All of the individual symbols in AusWrit can all be sorted into 4 different categories: poses, specifics, locations, and actions. In this video, I will only be focusing on the poses, what they mean, and how to write them, and then over the next few weeks I'll be uploading different videos explaining the rest of the categories individually. Before I get started, I should also mention that while all the examples in these videos will be written from left to right, this is only because I myself am right-handed. The idea is that left-handed people would instead write words and sentences from right to left with inverted versions of these symbols, similar to how left-handed signers would sign with inverted words to right-handed signers. Also, I've been told that if you are left-handed, it's a lot easier to write from right to left, so I don't see any reason why you shouldn't be allowed to. But anyway, let's stop beating around the bush and get into what these things called poses are, what they mean, and how they are written. In AusWrit, a pose tells the reader the general positions and shapes of the arms and hands that the signer starts off with just before signing. It is therefore always placed at the beginning of a word, and this also means that spaces are not necessary between words in a sentence, kinda like how kanji work in Japanese. There are 4 major identifiable components to a pose: the body, the hand shapes, the arms, and the head, and they are generally written in that order, but I'll get back to that later. I should also mention that poses and other symbols in AusWrit are written from a third-person perspective, as if the writing itself is signing the word at the reader, as opposed to a first-person perspective like with SignWriting or ASLwrite. This means that poses can either be front-facing, with a body like a square arch, or side-facing, with a body kinda like a falling curtain or something. You get the idea. Whenever creating a new AusWrit word, I typically think of front-facing poses by default. However, side-facing poses are necessary whenever the position of the hands or the direction of movement can be better expressed from a sideways perspective. There are 3 different types of hand shapes that can be used for a pose: fists, flats, and stars, and they respectively tell the reader whether the relevant hands are either closed or open with the fingers together or apart. More specifically, if 3 or more adjacent open fingers are spread apart from one another, then a star hand shape is used, but if those fingers are together, then a flat hand shape is used, and all the rest of the hands use a fist hand shape. There are a couple of minor exceptions exceptions to these specific rules, which very much depend upon hand specifics and how they work, but as I mentioned, I won't be talking about that in this video. Each type of hand shape also has 4 different wrist rotations, each specifying the relative positions of either the thumb or the palm, depending on whichever perspective they are being viewed from. Hand shapes are written either on the outside or the inside of a front-facing body, or directly in front of a side-facing body, and they can all be rotated along each perspective plane like so in any way that feels natural. The dominant hand shape is always written on the dominant side of the pose, and the supporting hand shape is always written on the supporting side of the pose. Poses never have the arms or hands cross each other because that is determined by an arm specific. Additionally, for side-facing poses, if the supporting hand is also used, then the hand shape is written immediately after the dominant one unless both shapes are exactly the same. When writing a pose, the easiest way to arrange all the parts together is to write the hand shapes and the individual strokes of the body sequentially according to text direction. As a couple of examples, this pose is written with the main body line first, then the dominant hand shape, then the supporting hand shape, then the square arch of the body wraps around them. This pose, on the other hand, starts off with the dominant hand shape first, then the main body line, then the square arch, and this pose starts off with the main body line, then the dominant hand shape, then the square arch, then the supporting hand shape. You get the idea. Each individual hand shape also has their own specific stroke orders depending on their rotations, but I'm not going to bore you with all the fine details. I'm just going to keep talking for as long as I can so that I'll be able to edit in all the still frames that outline the stroke orders for all the hand shapes and their rotations in case anybody wants to know what they are. But anyway, after the body and the hand shapes have been laid out, the arms are then written to link them both together. On front-facing poses, the arms begin at the wrist of each hand shape and are connected to their respective sides at a perpendicular angle to the body, but on side-facing poses, the dominant arm begins in the middle of the shoulder square as laid out here and crosses the torso line to connect to the dominant hand shape, while the supporting arm does not cross the torso line. However, if the supporting hand is in the same position as the dominant hand in a side-facing pose, then the supporting arm is represented with an extra line mark that connects the torso line to the dominant arm in some way. And finally, after all the parts have been connected, the head is written above the body to complete the pose. For the examples in this video, I've been using just plain circles for the heads, but another feature of poses that I haven't quite fleshed out yet is the ability to convey emotion with facial expressions. I do have a couple of ideas for the parts that make up facial expressions, such as 2 vertical lines for the eyes and various other lines for the mouth and eyebrows, but since I haven't gone into too much depth about it yet, I'm just gonna say that's all the necessary information you need to know about poses. In the next video, I'll be going over the specifics and how they interact with poses, but until that comes out, don't forget to like this video, share it online, subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell to be notified of new uploads. Thank you all for listening, and we'll speak again next time.